Hello, welcome. I'm Nicole Saylor. I'm director of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress. I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation, which is part of our ongoing Benjamin A. Botkin Lecture Series. The Botkin Lecture allows us to highlight the work of leading scholars in the disciplines of folklore, ethnomusicology, oral histories, and cultural documentation while enhancing and expanding the collections here at the American Folklife Center. The Botkin Lectures are also an important part of the acquisition activities for the library. Each lecture is recorded and will become part of the center's resources. In addition, after being processed, this lecture, like others in the Botkin series, will be posted on the library's website and will be available without charge for anyone who wants to access them throughout the world. So now would be an excellent time for you to silence your cell phones and other noise-making devices so you are not recorded here for posterity. All right, so today we have the pleasure of introducing noted folklorist Andrea Kitta, she's a folklorist, a professor at Eastern Carolina University, where she studies vaccination, contagion, contamination, and contamination narratives, conspiracy theories, belief, and the supernatural. Her monograph, Vaccinations and Public Concern in History, Legend, Rumor, and Risk Perception, won the Brian McConnell Book Prize in 2012 from the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research. She's also the author of the influential book, The Kiss of Death, Contagion, Contamination, and Folklore, which won the Chicago Folklore Prize at the American Folklore Society, and another Brian McConnell Prize in 2020. She's currently working on a co-edited collection on conspiracy theories. In her talk, Dr. Kitta will discuss contemporary theories and how they fit into other belief traditions and narratives, why so many people believe in conspiracy theories, and how they function. As she has noted, the term conspiracy theory has become loaded and often used to dismiss the belief system of others, especially those with opposing viewpoints. However, all of us engage in a little conspiratorial thinking at times, and we look forward to some pointers about how we can identify these stories and the echo chambers that they can create. So thank you again for joining us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kitta.
Organized here. I have so many things to show you, so I'll just put that down here for now. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is a wonderful crowd. I wasn't sure how many people would actually show up for a conspiracy theory talk, because you never know. But this is amazing. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's such an honor to speak at the Library of Congress. It is such an amazing space in the building, and I got a lovely tour this morning, and it's just incredible to be here. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. So yeah, let's start talking about some conspiracy theories. So today I'm going to talk to you about a lot of different conspiracies. I'm going to keep it light though, which those of you who have ever seen me talk before knows that's not my strong suit. So I tend towards the dark. A lot of my research tends to be on things that are a little darker, a little more controversial, but I'm going to try to keep it a little bit lighter today and talk about some of these conspiracy theories, because I think looking at them and being able to enjoy them, because there is an element in conspiracy theory that we're supposed to enjoy these too. They're supposed to be fun, they just haven't been necessarily used that way, especially more recently. So I'm going to try to make it a little bit fun today. So that is one of my goals in this lecture, is to cheer us up a little bit. So I want to start with something that was very important to me as a child. So this is a little clip I'm going to show you from a commercial that I remembered. I was about 10 years old when this came out. I remember it coming on TV, which is pretty stunning to remember a commercial from that time period. But I was already a baby folklorist. I knew this was going to happen. Like, this was happening. I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, there's all the signs right there. And this was one of them. Was that I was absolutely rapt at this commercial. I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is so interesting. I was already obsessed with Ghostbusters and Poltergeist, and then I saw this.
Chicago. A man is about to get on a routine flight. Suddenly he pauses. He doesn't know why, but he's got to walk away. An hour later, the plane goes down in flames. It's dismissed as chance. Britain. A woman has a sudden image of a black mountain that's moving, with children trapped underneath it. 2 hours later, a Welsh schoolhouse is buried in an avalanche of coal slag. It's dismissed as coincidence. Northern Texas. An unidentified flying object is reported by at least a dozen people. Although there were no storms in the area, it's dismissed as lightning. Now, Time Life Books announces an important new library, Mysteries of the Unknown, a series that explores the most controversial phenomena of our time and tells you everything that can be known. The Midwest. A mother feels a sharp pain in her right hand. Far away at that exact same moment, her daughter screams as she touches a hot pan. Just chance? Or is it telling us something about our own untapped capabilities? Mysteries of the Unknown goes deeper into unexplained phenomena than ever before. It documents the facts and uncovers what people were never willing to talk about. Stonehenge. A visitor fashions a wire antenna in the shape of an ancient Egyptian symbol. He points it at the stones, and a surge of power rushes into his arm, knocking him unconscious. Was it all in his mind, or was it much more than that? To experience Mysteries of the Unknown, examine your first volume, Mystic Places, for 10 days free. Then decide if you want to dismiss it.
To order your first book, Mystic Places, call 1-800-532-1100.
This is just like
Examine
a
it
time
for
capsule
10
right
days.
here, isn't it?
Keep it and pay just $12.99.
Yeah, just absolutely amazing. I could not get over that. It was just so amazing to me as a child watching this and being like, oh my gosh, like I need these books, right? I need to have them. Luckily, somebody in my family also felt that way, and I think we got 2 or 3 of them and then stopped getting them for some reason. But I was absolutely just like fascinated. There was all this secret information that was going to be contained in these amazing books that I was going to get, and then I would know all these things. Especially as a child, you know, children in general tend to be fairly powerless. It seemed like that exciting secret information could be mine for the low, low price of $19.99. So I was just absolutely excited and rapt. And I think that, you know, was one of the reasons I got into conspiracy theory later on. But I do need to point out that not all of these are so great. I felt the need to point that out. So even when it is a little bit fun, if you start doing the digging, it's not fun anymore. Yeah, a lot of these books kind of propose the idea that people could not have possibly built the pyramids. They needed alien help, and most of the people they're talking about are people of color. Yeah, most of the time Stonehenge totally could have been built, but the pyramids, maybe not so much. So there's some definite hidden racism in there. And then also the giant lizard people, which I thought, well, at least we have the giant lizard people. No, we don't. Nope, somebody had to ruin that for us too. Actually, the person who invented this whole idea that there were giant lizard people was an anti-Semite and you know, wrote extensively about it, which is very disappointing. I really wanted to do that, and I had to include the Denver airports. I was recently there, and they were doing construction, and they had all these kind of signs. They've really leaned into all the conspiracy theories about the Denver airport, which I think, honestly, that's probably for the best, because everybody believes them anyway. So they've just kind of leaned into them. But then I also kind of wonder, oh, how much do they know about what they've leaned into? Yeah. I've just got one of those brains that has to ruin everything. So yeah, I wanted to kind of start discussing that, but you know, before I get too far into this, you know, let's talk a little bit more about what exactly is a conspiracy theory. So the word conspiracy theory, made up, popular by the CIA, asking questions for the JFK assassination. Sorry, no, I'm sorry. I had already messed with you. I tried to give you, there's actually a conspiracy about the term conspiracy theory. So when it was first used and when it came out, it was not for the JFK assassination. I'm sorry. Like I had to do some pretty deep diving into finding this stuff. That's the other thing too, is it's hard to find this information. Even when you're a scholar that knows what you're looking for, sometimes it's hard to find it. But no, we see this much earlier. So the first recorded use that we've seen, at least in print, is from 1863 in a letter to the New York Times. And basically it was referencing England's aristocrats supporting the Confederacy during the Civil War. Yeah, it sounds like a conspiracy, right? Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the first times we really see it in print. It really became notably popularized and in the 1881 shooting of then President James A. Garfield. So that, especially about whether or not he had accomplices. So that's when we really kind of saw it kind of come to its peak, and then of course it has not died down since then. So it's been a very, very popular phrase since then. So before I get too far into this as well, let's talk about this too. We've always believed in conspiracy theory. I'm just going to point that out. This is not a new thing by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, probably our most well-known conspiracy were the Salem witch trials. This is, yeah, absolutely. This is something that people really truly believed and it was, Satan was in their presence. Satan comes up a lot, by the way. Satan's really kind of all over these things. So as I go through, you'll see some more of that. In my next example too, that George Washington, a Freemason, was thought to be a Satanist. Conspiracy theory about even George Washington. We also have that in the 1800s, people were worried that the US was run by the Illuminati. That's how old the Illuminati is. It even predates that. So we've been talking about the Illuminati for a very long time. But atheist Thomas Jefferson was going to ban religion and turn the US over to France. That was the big concern. So I know some of these things looking back, they were like, really? And then I think about like the things that we talk about now that people are going to look back at us and be like, really? So like, oh. In 1844, the Great Disappointment, when the Millerites thought the apocalypse was coming, and it didn't. So no spoiler there. It did not happen. And of course, there's so many more in American history. Area 51, the moon landing, the Red Scare. There's just, I could go on and on and on. So there's so many of these that we could get into. But so many people, think, oh, this is a niche thing. This is not at all mainstream. It's mainstream. It is everywhere. It is absolutely mainstream. So they've always been popular. And just to give you a slightly more recent example, also we can't blame the internet for this. It gets around on the internet, but this all existed long before it. I'm passing around these beautiful books that you could have ordered for a very low price. But we also have to think of Art Bell. Everybody remember Art Bell? Yeah, Coast to Coast AM. I actually remember listening to it as a young person. It was not fringe. He was the third largest radio audience for a talk show, after Rush Limbaugh and Dr. Laura. Yeah, it was Art Bell came in third. So that's how popular it was. And it actually, even though he's passed, it still continues. And it is on every weeknight, apparently now. So I can only imagine, like, how much material do they need? How much do we have to rehash certain conspiracy theories? But they're still all out there. This is still something that you can actually listen to this day. And then, of course, we had another big mass-produced conspiracy theory thing. The X-Files. And I remember being in college and watching the X-Files, and I remember it was Friday nights, it was always on Friday nights, and all of my friends and I would get together and we'd be getting ready to go out that night, but we were watching the X-Files while we were getting ready. So that was just what we did. I also, when I put these together, I was like, oh, clearly smoking causes conspiracy theories. But then I also had the realization, I was like, oh my gosh, were they trying to make the cigarette smoking guy look like Art Bell? And I haven't found anything on it, but I'm going to start that today. So that's my new conspiracy theory. That's what they were going for, because I was like, oh yeah, they kind of got the same vibe. So that's my new conspiracy theory. It doesn't hurt anybody. So that was what I thought I would go with for this, something fun for us to tell everybody that you learned today. So let me give you a definition. Well, I've talked a lot around it, and this is one of my favorite definitions. I like that it's numbered. I like that it's clear. So the conspiracy theory is a specific agent is named with a clear motivation. We have the agent is evil, and the outcome is destructive, which is easy to understand. Evil results in evil, of course. It's not complicated. There's probably a more accurate explanation would be pretty complex, unfortunately. Those of us who work for large institutions know that nothing goes as smoothly as a conspiracy theory seems to. I was like, have these people never been to a meeting? Nothing ever gets solved. How do conspiracy theorists do it? I don't understand. But everything just kind of comes together and works together so perfectly. The evil agent has the capacity for some big event. They control important resources. They act with allies. They do it in secret so no one can stop it. And the conspiracy theories sometimes do happen, or sorry, conspiracies sometimes happen, and everybody agrees they have happened. And I'll talk about those in a little bit here. And some learned, respected, prominent people, not just ignorant, marginal people, promote the conspiracy theory. It may be self-serving, but it cannot be ignored. So I think this is a pretty good definition that kind of breaks it down into some other places. My co-author and I have also come up with this definition: is a conspiracy theory is an aggregate of assembled forms of evidence that points out conspiracy thinker to the conclusion the conspiracy has occurred, whether or not it actually has. So that's a shorter definition, but one that we've come up with for talking about conspiracy theory. So I think one of the things we really do have to sit down and think about is, how do we think of people who believe in conspiracy theories? And I think we've got a pretty clear image of who we have in our mind when we're talking about conspiracy theory. It's always somebody in a tinfoil hat, somebody that lives in their mom's basement, somebody that's got a lot of red string, and they are making all the connections. This tends to be what we think of, but it's not really entirely correct, which is actually why I like the term conspiracy thinking and conspiracy thinker, because I think that we all engage in conspiracies in some way. And it might be very low-level conspiracies that do not matter. I've asked this of my students every semester, and I say, what's a conspiracy that you believe in? And every year it comes up that the parking people are after us. Yeah, after us personally. Yeah, there's other little ones too. Like you think about, I bet at the gym they probably add weight to the scale just to get me more motivated, right? Little things like that, right? And they don't harm anybody. They're kind of these little things that we think of. And it actually is a fairly healthy thing for us to think about conspiracy and to be aware of that and to be thinking along those lines in some ways. So I have kind of turned this out as conspiracy theorist, so someone who actively participates in the conspiracy theory, an active tradition bearer, we would call them in folklore. As a conspiracy thinker, maybe as somebody who is more passively involved. So I think a lot of us are probably conspiracy thinkers, more passively involved. We have these little things, but we don't act on them. We don't do anything to try to necessarily prove. So more of a passive tradition bearer in that case, in the folkloric sense. So how should we think about them? There's a lot of different ways, I think, that we can think about conspiracy theory. And some of the ones I'm going to talk about today I think are interesting, and they give us some really good examples. So first, I think we need a better word for when a conspiracy theory becomes a conspiracy, so when we find out that something is true. Because the words are too closely related. They don't work. I don't have a good word yet. Maybe you can help me with that. I have not thought of a good word, other than maybe true conspiracy, just to emphasize that it did turn out to be. But the Tuskegee experiments, Watergate, these were all conspiracy theories until they just became Tuskegee and Watergate. All of these different things, sterilization of Native Americans, all conspiracy theories until they just became true. Right, so sometimes there are things that happen that turn out to be true, but we label them as conspiracy theory until they become more popular, they become proven in some way. Also, I think we need to remember that it does pay off for us to be a little bit suspicious sometimes. And I like this one quote. The conspiracy theorist has a compelling cause to suspect that today's society suffers a serious and unavoidable prior probability of conspiracy. Conspiracy is all too human. In our personal lives, many of us have encountered the existence of treacherous disloyalties, conspiratorial sexual infidelities, carefully crafted business betrayals, and slander that insidiously and sometimes never reveal themselves to the victims. So we've all seen this happen in real life. We have had arguments with friends. We have had neighbors that have caused property damage. Conspiracies happen. So I think in some ways, it is a little healthy for us. This is what keeps humans alive, right? Is our going like, wait a minute, what's going on? what's happening here? I think it's actually when we don't question things that's one of our biggest problems. So there's also ongoing events, too, that we have to talk about that make people suspicious of governing bodies and authority. And these are the things that are currently happening. And we don't have to look at the past. We can look at ongoing police violence towards the Black community, medical billing and insurance, which is a massive conspiracy theory in my opinion. The way that if you've ever gotten your billing from like 12 different places and you have no idea how much anything costs, that's a conspiracy in my mind. And also, of course, political disinformation. And that's, of course, the big elephant in the room of all of this is political disinformation. And that's something we have to be very concerned about. So one of the ways that we can look at this, and this is the action-oriented response, which is my co-author, Jesse Fivecoat, has come up with this idea. And thinking about the narratives and the legend beyond the narrative event itself. So historically, a lot of the folklore analysis have been discussed under the umbrella term of ostension. So ostension is a general term that usually means the acting out of urban legends. Or, as the folklorists Linda Degg and Andrew Varsoni described it, quote, presentation as contrasted to representation, showing the reality itself instead of using any kind of signification. Degg and Varsoni also point to an understanding of ostensive action as the showing of an action by showing the action itself by another action. So it gets a little confusing, but I promise it'll become clear. So this is really significant because folklore scholarship on the subject has portrayed ostension as a roadmap for action. Thus, the nature itself is a script that individuals can act on. Indeed, in the 1983 article in which they first make the use of this term ostension, Degg and Varsoni link ostension heavily to the notion of copycat crime. So people acting out the legend and literally acting it out. They are killing the boyfriend. They are killing the babysitter. This means that individual knowingly perpetrates the actions described in a narrative event in which they have some level of familiarity. Or in other words, the narrative is a script for us to follow and they act. Right? So we get the narrative, the action happens. Bill Ellis also reminds us that we must, quote, acknowledge the traditional narrative exists not simply as verbal text to be collected, transcribed, and archived. They are also maps for action, often violent action. So these are pretty important, right? They can be a map for action. But then we have to ask ourselves, what happens when there is no action? When there's no full-fledged story. And Jesse Fivecoat goes on to use Pizzagate, which I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with, because it was not very far away from here, as an event to kind of talk about this. So, just to refresh your memory, this is when my fellow North Carolinian Edgar Madison Welch drove to Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria on December 4th, 1916 to, quote-unquote, free the children he believed that were there, being held there as part of a satanic, here there's Satan again, child sex ring perpetrated by the Democrats. Yes, we all remember that. There was no narrative that led him to do that, no specific narrative that said someone should go and free these kids. What happened was he just was talking from fragments he found on the internet. He was looking at and talking with other people who were conspiracy theorists, and then was driven to action. So there was no narrative to tell him what to do, but he took this information and still acted on it. And we're seeing this more and more, where people are taking the information, things like Q drops if you're into QAnon, and then acting on it in some sort of way. So this is very concerning, right? This is very worrisome. There's not necessarily a narrative that tells you what to do. People are coming up with what to do based off of these narratives. So I'm going to give you another example. We're going to take it back to being light for a second. And this is something called Birds Aren't Real. So I'm actually going to let him describe it in his own words. So I'll just go ahead and play this.
From 1969 through 2001, the U.S. government murdered over 12 billion birds in the American skies. They did this using poisonous toxins dropped from airplanes that was contagious and murdered all of the birds over the course of about 40 years. Now, I know this is not the public understanding of this and may sound absurd, but please just bear with me and keep an open mind and just be respectful, please, as I share this information with you. I know a lot of you may be wondering, why would the government kill 12 billion birds? It seems like an awful lot of trouble for a government to go through. The reason is as devastating as it is simple. For each bird the government killed, they replaced it with a surveillance drone replica in disguise designed to spy on the American people. Now, some may say, if you're the government at least, that this is a worthy sacrifice, these 12 billion lives, for the safety of the people, right? I don't know about that. It seems like a pretty serious limit on our freedom. Wouldn't you agree? The proof that birds are robots is all around us if you start looking. For starters, birds charge their batteries on power lines. So they can refuel up high and they can watch the civilians, you know? They also track civilians using a liquid tracking device. You ever wonder why birds poop on your car? Do you need more evidence? I can go all day up here. Who here has seen a baby pigeon? You haven't, have you? It's weird. There's all these adult pigeons. Where are all the babies? They come out of the factory as adults. So, there's no organic growth, you know? It's a smoking gun. Over the years, as I began putting this information together, I began realizing the extent of all this. And there were times I wished I never even learned this. My life would be so much easier. You know, I remember before I knew this information, I was happier, my steps were lighter, you know. But I always come back to this. It is my moral obligation, as one of the few privileged enough to know this, to share it with you, the blind sheep, you know? And that's what I've been doing for years now. I'm a part of a movement called Birds Aren't Real. And in 2021, I was promoted to public information officer for the movement. It's the honor of my life. I had one job. No, thank you. Thank you. My one job was to deprogram the public from the bird lie. And deprogram is a very specific word, because you all are programmed. You know that, right? We live in a pro-bird civilization drenched in propaganda. For instance, every state has a state bird. The national mascot is a bald eagle. Presidents don't talk, they tweet. Then the tweets are covered on the bird logo media. Once I knew this, my first order of business was to get the information out to the American people. Get off the internet into the real world. So that's what I did. I bought a van, covered it in decals with facts. I wanted to turn the highway into an information highway, awaken the people. I went city to city, holding rallies, meeting up with our thousands of supporters growing by the day, and I was putting up billboards wherever we went, sharing our simple but powerful message. Look at how beautiful it is. Now the government did take note of what we were doing, and they sent some intimidators to try and deter us from our mission. You can see them right there. But we did not fold. We kept on going. We started holding rallies at some of the most evil pro-bird corporations in the world, starting with Twitter, where we brought hundreds out to protest their pro-bird logo. Months later, we brought 500 people out to CNN headquarters to demand fairer coverage for bird truthers on air. Then, just last year, we brought 2,000 people out to Washington Square in New York City to demand that the mayor shut down every pigeon in the city. Here's what that looked like.
Just amazing.
Can't even tell you how that felt. I took that video, standing on the
Yeah, so I wanted you to see just both the video of him and his rallies. He was joking, but he stayed in character for about 4 or 5 years and kept going around and doing this. And it was a really interesting experiment in some ways. And just in case you're not quite sure, if you haven't heard about this, you're not sold on how widespread it is, there are shirts that you can buy. There's a cross stitch, so you can cross stitch it. I love Steve brought his own mug.
It's the main version. It says seagulls aren't real.
Yeah. But I love the fact that someone was like, I should make a cross stitch. this is what they were, I love the thought that went into that. And then my own personal favorite, when one of my friends was here last week, they saw one of the posters of me, and they posted it just on Facebook, and then someone commented at the bottom, "If it flies, it spies." So that was right on one of my friends' Facebook. So I very much appreciated that even the poster of this got some of the typical things said about birds aren't real. So this is a very widespread. So like, how did this happen? And why did he do it? He actually said it was on a whim. He was watching counter-protests at the Women's March in Memphis in 2017. And so he made a sign that said, "Birds aren't real," and was standing with the counter-protesters. And this video of him went viral. And everybody was like, "Who is this crazy guy that thinks birds aren't real?" And he went with it, and like I said, stayed in character for years. So he became really passionate, though, as a result of this, of how to respond to conspiracy theorists. And I like this quote from him, because he says, "We have to ask ourselves, what can I control? And the one thing that we can control is how we treat people in our own lives." And I think that's why I'm passionate about reframing our approach to conspiracy theory, centering it more on belonging than belief. Because at the end of the day, you're debating the truth. It never is going. If you're debating the truth, it's never going to work. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. That's just really kind of got to me, and also in part because I wrote something very similar, but slightly more academic. And I will show you that in a little bit. So if we can think about what we can do, and this is the thing that I ended up writing about it, and I wrote this in 2012 when I was talking about vaccine conspiracy theories. And I said it's useful to consider conspiracy thinking from another perspective, offered by Paul Farmer. And he refers to it as a sorry, I always mispronounce this word, humanuric, I can never say that word, of generosity. The viewpoint asks that we proceed as if our informants themselves were experts in the moral reading of the ills that affect them. And he was specifically talking especially about medical information, but I thought it really did apply here to conspiracy theory as well, as a way to lead us to an interpretive analysis accountable to history, political economy, the force fields from which conspiracy theories initially rose. Through the use of this, I'm not even going to try, one hopes to address these concerns of the lay public and discuss why these narratives are expressed rather than focusing on their plausibility, which has been the focal point of much of the work done. So we always go back to plausibility. It's not true, it's not real, here's all the reasons. But instead, what if we did something a little bit different? What if we asked why they want to believe in these things? What about these things speaks to them? So I think that is really what we want to look at. What is their motivation? Why do they feel they need to be a part of this? And that's a really interesting question. And if we think about it from how a non-theorist react to a conspiracy theory, yeah, we're not always so great, right? We don't really respond very well when we're non-theorists and we don't believe the conspiracy theory. We don't act very well. So one of the things that the birds aren't real guy said was that the conspiracy theories that he grew up with, so he grew up in a community that was a conspiracy theory community, he felt really alone because those people believed in conspiracy theories and he didn't. And then he also noted that the reverse happened. When he was playing the conspiracy theorist, people would come up to him and tell him he was wrong and call him stupid. But nobody asked him why, right? Why did he want to be a part of this? Why did he want to believe in these things? So that's really interesting to think about. So how we respond to them. And then we also have to think about how conspiracy theorists think of themselves. And this is where it gets not so great for myself as an academic, because some of the ways that they think of themselves is stuff I don't agree with. And a lot of us are going to hate this, especially folklorists will hate this. But one of the things that conspiracy theorists absolutely love is Joseph Campbell. And folklorists hate Joseph Campbell. I'll explain why in a second. But a recent conference I went to, folklorist Ian Brody brought up that even though we might hate Joseph Campbell, people engaging in conspiracy theories love him. And if we want to understand conspiracy theory, we have to understand this as a part of their thinking. So the reason why we don't like him, he was very much, he had this whole idea of the monomyth, that all stories were the same story. And there was no context to these stories. There's none of the complexities. There's none of the interesting cultural information. He just didn't think mattered. And of course it matters. It absolutely matters. It was also a very white male European lens. So it really doesn't look at other cultures. It's primarily looking at that one. It's also just bad scholarship. He picked and chose what things he liked and what worked and what ones kind of went into it. And there's really an over-reliance on Jung and the whole concept of archetypes. And of course, if archetypes do not exist, and if they did exist, they would be culturally specific. So that's part of the reason why folklorists really don't like him and his work. But that's what conspiracy theorists like. So we have to understand why. Why do they like this? Why does every movie I see about a superhero have to involve this? Because I feel like this every time I watch a superhero movie. I'm like, oh God, here we're back to the hero's journey once again. And there is a dare I say, conspiracy theory that Joseph Campbell actually said when asked, well, what about the role of a woman? What is the heroine's role? And he said, women have no story. Yeah, so there's another reason not to like him. But yeah, we see it so often. It's all part of the Star Wars universe. It's part of so much of what we see, like Aquaman is straight out of that handbook right there, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. So when we're thinking about this, we do have to kind of understand this, even if it's not something we particularly like. Also, we have to think about what people get from conspiracy theory, because there's a reason they keep doing this, right? They don't just do it randomly. There's something they're getting out of this. And I think the biggest thing is it explains an unexplainable world. Our world is messy and complicated, and we don't often get the closure that we would love to see. But conspiracy theories are simple. Everything comes together in this kind of beautiful way. And if you actually watch somebody, like when they're really in their complex and they're connecting all these different things and they're talking about it, you're like, okay, no, I get it. Like I can see the beauty in this and the connection. But of course, it's all based on things that aren't necessarily true. So it's very self-soothing because nothing happens by accident. And I think that's really important too, to think about this as the morality is simple, the world is simple, everything has agency, everyone's an important player. Right? So you are important. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't feel. They don't necessarily feel that they are important. And this makes them feel that way. Like I said, it gives that closure and it gives that connection. So everything is connected. We can see all the little red strings attaching to everything. And it also makes the world feel both intentional and a little bit magical, too. Right? Something is happening, and you're in the know. You're one of the few people that understand it. And this is another quote I liked from another scholar. He said, but if we treat them as psychological aberrations, some weird fringe thing, when in fact they're offshoot of how our minds work. This is how our minds work. We have a tendency towards conspiracy. It's just the way we work and how we think. But it's not something that's necessarily just out there. It's not just for this fringe group of people. And I think it also just gives us this chance to be more. It gives us a chance to be a hero. I'm pretty sure that's what was happening with Pizzagate. That guy thought, I have children, I'm going to save these children, and I am going to be a hero. Right? What a great narrative. Who wouldn't want to be a hero? It lets us feel like we're in the know. We're part of things. We're in the middle of something. We're not like everybody else, and we're part of a community. So conspiracy theorists have a community, and that's probably what they're lacking in their everyday life, is connections with other people and a community. But they can go online, and they can find other people that believe the things they believe, and now all of a sudden, they have a community. And not only a community, a magical secret community, right? Who doesn't want that? Who wouldn't want to be a part of something like that? So I think it's actually, probably the real question is, why don't more of us believe in these things? Because it's so attractive when you look at it from this standpoint. And I also don't want you to underestimate the power of belief in all of this. Yeah, I do love this. I've worked a lot with a vaccine narrative as one of my main areas, and yeah, I had to bring in a little bit about vaccines into this. But this idea with the microchipping, you're getting microchipped, of course, with your COVID vaccine. And people not realizing, of course, their phones have a microchip in them and following them everywhere. But when we look at the power of belief, and we think about it as a complex system. So this isn't just this little thing on the edge of their belief system. It's enmeshed. It's all through it. It's not something that you can just sort of like pluck it right out of there. No, it's so deeply involved in so many different things. It's a really tangled, complicated web. So I think that's what we need to think about too, is how this isn't just this light little sprinkle of conspiracy on top of something. This is something that's deeply interconnected into other beliefs. And that sometimes you have to get creative. And I'm going to tell you another story. This is one of my favorite stories from COVID when I was interviewing people, and I was interviewing a few nurses that were giving out the vaccine early on. And one of them told me the best story. She was vaccinating, a gentleman had come in, he was mandated by work to get the vaccine. He did not want to get it, but he was mandated, so he was there talking to her about this, and he started bringing up microchips. And she told me, she said, well, I was just, I was tired, it was the end of a long shift, and I got kind of just sick of this. And what she said to him is she pulled out the vial, and she says, do you see this vial? Right on here, it says, do not shake. And he says, okay. And she says, I get 3 to 4 doses out of each of these bottles. If I can't shake it, how can I evenly distribute the microchips? And he went, huh. It's kind of ridiculous, but for him, that put the question in there, because that was something he hadn't thought about, right? If you can't shake the vaccine, and your microchips would obviously fall to the bottom, they wouldn't be suspended perfectly, you would have to shake it up to get those microchips evenly distributed. So this really did, he had a moment, he had a genuine moment, and she was kind of, he was just he just kept saying, I never thought of it that way. I never thought of it that way. And it really got to him. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're brilliant. What a great idea. And it was just something that she kind of just said kind of off the cuff. But wow, what an interesting way. Instead of working against his belief and saying, they're fine, they've been approved, and listing all the facts, she instead went into his belief system and said, okay, I'm gonna work with what you think and show you how this couldn't possibly be real. And I think this is very true when we start to talk about things like play as well, because play is definitely a big part of this. And I think that when we think about this is one of my personal favorites in play. The conspiracy theory that the Loch Ness Monster is actually the ghost of an ancient dinosaur. And since it affects nothing and nobody, I've decided to believe it. It's a little treat for me. I love that. I thought, oh my gosh, I saw that online, and this came out in 2021. We're all still in June of 2021. We're all still pretty pandemic-y. And I thought, oh, yeah, maybe that is just a nice little treat. So I decided to just look to see if this is just some random person. No, it's a whole thing. It is an entire thing. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about why there aren't any dinosaur ghosts, as I found several websites, and they were just too precious not to share. Some of the listings came up with, because they weren't intellectually developed enough. Yeah, you have to apparently be intellectually developed in order to have a ghost. The energy had dissipated over time. They were a long time ago, so the energy has just kind of dissipated. This one's my personal favorite, and it makes me laugh every time. They have no unfinished business. That one kills me. I don't know why, but I think I start to imagine dinosaurs being like, I never, and then the asteroid hits, and they have no unfinished business, so they're good. They don't need to be a ghost. Also, yeah, they would haunt areas that no longer exist, so they would now be underwater. So maybe there's dinosaur ghosts, but they're in the ocean. I love this idea too, just little dinosaurs, just ghosts floating through the ocean with all the other terrifying things in the ocean. And of course that they've moved on, which is another great way. But I love this idea because this is playful, right? This is the way conspiracy theories, the way we want them to be. We want them to be a little bit more playful and a little bit less loaded in some ways. And I think that in some ways we do have to think about that element of play that's still involved. People love conspiracies because they're fun, right? There's something about them that is inherently fun. We just have to know which conspiracies we're talking about. So my conclusions to this is that we really need to start arguing about with people about what is true and what's not true. As someone who studied vaccination for over 20 years, that's not the tactic that works. Just pointing out facts does not work. So I think we really need to get past that when it comes to conspiracy theory as well. So we need to focus on why they need these things. What is this fulfilling for them? Is it a sense of community? Is this the sense of giving them the feeling that they're in the know or they're a part of something bigger? We also have to think about what actions might result of these beliefs, because we've seen the results so far, and they can be pretty intense and pretty important. And we also need to come up with these creative approaches. We need to think of different ways, like the nurse that I brought up earlier, a creative way to talk to people about conspiracy theory and to talk to them about their belief system. And also, I think it's okay. You can believe in Nessie as a dinosaur ghost. I think that's really, really fine. So you can have that as a treat. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you coming. Absolutely.
We have time for some questions. Dr. Kitta?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, you're going to go. Okay, yeah.
Not as powerful as your nurse story, but I think one of the most interesting things to me about Pizzagate is most of it transpired in the basement.
Yes.
There is no basement. At Common Ping Pong. But I was wondering, and you're dealing with people in here, that wouldn't be sufficient, though, I don't think, in the same way to do that, because they'd come around with, well, we meant. So how do you distinguish between something, can it be distinguished between something like the nurse found that changed this person's life and a fact like that wouldn't? Have you found anything in that in your research?
Yeah, that's definitely the hard part, is figuring out where can we work with somebody. And I think the best way to start is you start on the edge of the web, if we're going to kind of go with this web metaphor, and you pull the string that's like not quite so attached, right? You start with the little things, and you kind of start entering that doubt into people's minds. Let them do some more research. Let them look around some more. So you kind of have to pull at those edges, I think, instead of going straight for the center. So something like this, you could talk about, yes, you could bring up there's no basement, and so at Pizzagate could have possibly, that whole entire event, there was nothing there, there was no basement. But there's a lot of conspiracy theorists who would be like, well, that's because they covered it. Be like, no, there's all these tunnels under the city, and yeah, there are tunnels under the city, and there's all kinds of different things. I was just in a tunnel earlier today to go get this tea. And so, we know that those things exist. So maybe it's something else. Maybe we have to pull it at something else of, don't you think people would notice that these kids were missing? Why would, where are their parents? Where are all these other things? And we don't see them. So you hear things like, oh, they've hired people for, to play actors in this. Well, why aren't there any actors in this one? Where did they come from? Like, if you believe that they're like hiring people, that's a big one that's said about a lot of the school shootings, that they've hired the actors. Then where are the people for this one, right? I'm not hearing any parents on the news talking about this. Why? So you could kind of like maybe go through those things, but if you do have to enmesh yourself a little bit in them in order to understand them, but to also to help people think about them and think through them. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, please. I'll let you guys choose, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are approaching 9/11 commemorations.
Yes.
Has a growing amount of evidence of movies, of documentaries over the 20 past years helped debunk the conspiracy theories about 9/11? Yes
and no. So yeah, there's especially 9/11 is still one that we still talk a lot about. There's a lot of other ones as well. This is the weird thing about conspiracy theory, is sometimes the more you try to disprove it, the more people are like, well, there's a reason why you're doing that. You wouldn't be trying so hard if it was just true. So sometimes you actually feed into the conspiracy theory by creating things that debunk the conspiracy theory. So that's one of the things you have to be really careful. And that's something that's obviously very concerning, so we have to worry about that. So yeah, I think in some cases time is a factor, but I mean, we still talk about JFK and the assassination, right? And look how old that is, and we're still talking about that as conspiracy theory. So yeah, some of them I think are harder because they are in that core, that main part of the web, that it's harder to divorce them from all the other things. But yeah, there's still unfortunately a lot of conspiracy theories about 9/11, and that's something we still hear people talk about. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a very good presentation.
Yeah.
Concerning about conspiracy theories, actually I'm in the communications field, actually dealing with political communication and health risk communication. So with my field, I see some things. There are 4 things which I see. Power and powerlessness, where the powerful fuel the conspiracy theories, and the powerless tend to swallow the conspiracy. And then the second thing is the educated, and then the uneducated. And it goes the same with the educated ones, at the same time swallowing and fueling, and then the uneducated ones also are simply swallowing them. And then the third one is very important, which I look at, is propaganda. Propaganda with the conspiracy theory, fueling, because propaganda fuels conspiracy. Like, for example, let me give you 2 examples. Goebbels and his propaganda against the Jews, it went with conspiracy theories, where the rats are coming, they are... And then now what I see, at present, what I see is with the American media and state propaganda agents against China and Russia. At the same time, Russia against the West. These are the the propaganda theories going on with. It's not only the actual war. The war is also on the propaganda field. And the propaganda field is covered with conspiracy theories. They are going to do that. There is going to be this. And then the fourth thing, which I'm going to finish, is conspiracy and the holy books, which almost every person grew with, be it Christian, Islam, Jews, or Hindu, or Buddhist, whatever it is. And then when we grow up, it was saying Satan fueling and following us to do this and that with a conspiracy. And the last statement which you put, people love conspiracies because they are fun. Because they are fun, because they grow up with their public opinion is made with them. Because public opinion starts with the family.
It does, yeah.
That's why, okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting. You've really outlined some of the issues too, because one of the things is conspiracy theory tends to be on both sides, right? Like you're talking about the powerless and the powerful. The people in power have conspiracies about the people who aren't in power, and the people who aren't in power have conspiracies about the people who are. One of my favorite examples of this is, it's a really great article that Patricia Turner wrote about the Amistad, and how there was conspiracy theories on both sides. So both the people that were enslaved and the people who are doing the enslaving had the same conspiracy theory about each other, that they were both doing this to eat people for cannibalism. So the people who had been enslaved were thinking that they were the food, that's what was going to happen. And then the people who were doing the enslaving were saying, well, these people aren't real people because they eat other people. And so cannibalism was being used as both sides, which is really intense and very interesting, but exactly the same conspiracy theory, right, that was being used in very different ways. And we see that all over the place in a lot of these conspiracy theories, where there's both sides of the group have very similar conspiracy theories. Probably the most popular one is the blood libel legend. That's used, it's typically anti-Semitic text, but it has been used in other ways for other cultures as well. Yeah, so there's a lot of those out there. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, please.
Hi, so how do we, I guess, challenge or start to unravel conspiracy theories that at a core, some of the stuff in it may be based in truth? For example, like the comet ping pong, obviously not true.
Yeah.
But, we do see situations where people in power have used their power and wealth to, take advantage sexually of people like you see Jeffrey Epstein. We have, Harvey Weinstein, all these situations where, people had kind of covered up or really kind of turned a blind eye to these, to these injustices. So how do we, when people have, see, Epstein and all this stuff, and they say that, obviously people in power are just covering it up, in cases of like Pizzagate, how do we kind of divide that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is I don't know entirely, but because it is difficult, because we do know that conspiracies happen, right? Like you're talking about with like Epstein and all of these things, we know that there is, I mean, sex trafficking happens. We hear about it all the time, but it's, you know, and that was one of the things actually I saw somebody had commented when Pizzagate first happened, is if, you know, I really wish this guy was as passionate about sex trafficking and you know, all of these kind of incidences as he was about this, right? But a lot of times that doesn't always fit the narrative they want. He specifically, and I, you know, I don't want to put beliefs into his head or anything like that, but he was, I think in some ways, thinking that he was rescuing children that were like his children. He was not rescuing people that did not look like him. And I think that is part of the narrative. You know, I don't want to necessarily label him in any way like that, but I think when he was thinking of saving children, he had children. And he was probably picturing his own children in that situation, because who wouldn't? Who wouldn't do that? So I also wonder if there's, you know, there is that undercurrent of sometimes, you know, racism, anti-Semitism, all of that in there. So yeah, so that becomes really complicated, and knowing what's real and what's not. And that's where the hard work comes in. And that's something I saw during the pandemic. There was one point where all of my friends who are folklorists were talking about the dolphins that were in the canals in Venice, which wasn't true. And I was just like, oh guys, no, you're folklorists, you should know better. There was a couple of people that were pushing it, but there were things that were true. Like there were wild hogs going through the streets, and there were, you know, deer that were walking through neighborhoods that they wouldn't have normally been in. So it was part true, but that particular one wasn't true. So how do you figure that out, right? How do you separate it? And it's hard. It's very hard, and it's hard to. Yeah, how do you actually make this happen? Mm-hmm.
Do you have any recommendations on how to do like further research on stuff? So situations like a lot of one was voter suppression,
Mm-hmm.
which voter suppression does happen, but not in the ways that certain political candidates said in 2020.
Yeah, there are a lot of good resources online. You just have to be really careful which resources you're looking at, especially because a lot of these things, speaking of propaganda, a lot of these sites get duped. You have to really look at what's in the box at the top. What is the actual address, right? So there were a while, I think it was ABC or NBC, I can't remember which one, but they were duped for a while, and it was .co instead of .com. And they were putting up all these false information, and everybody thought it was that website. So it gets really difficult to find these things online. But I think a good search, and of course I'm going to recommend all of my folklorists who've also written on conspiracy theory. There's some really amazing stuff out there. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants with the upcoming book and everything, but there are just so many amazing academics that have written on this, and not just folklorists, a lot of other academics too. And their writing is understandable. So even if you're not an academic, you know, they're written in ways. What's that? And librarians, yes, of course. Yeah, we got to talk to the librarians. They're amazing at finding resources for us. And yeah, I love librarians for that reason. They can find anything. I'm always amazed by them.
Time for two more questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kitta, for that wonderful presentation, as always. Before you started talking, I would have said this would have been an odd sort of relationship. But the more you talked, and especially when you got to the part about systems of belief, is when I find a really interesting resonance with, leaving Joseph Campbell aside, as whoever he was, but Peter Worsley's, you know, sort of locus classicus anthropological reading of the John Frum cargo cults in Papua New Guinea, in which Papua New Guineans believed that in the aftermath of airdrops from Allied forces, which brought in all the trappings of modernity into that particular part of the world, that they started building, they established a cargo cult. And they built airplanes, which are effigies of the airplanes they saw dropping these goods from the sky. And so it became a system of belief, and it speaks also to your notion of community. And I wondered if that has, you know, some interesting resonances for you in the kind of way in which you're thinking about systems of belief and sort of communitarian and collective ideals, no matter how fragmentary and how episodic these kinds of moments are, and, you know, bringing together all this amalgamation of, you know, native systems of belief with you know, external forces. That takes it out of the realm of the Pizzagate and into something else, it seems to me. Or what that something else is, I'm not quite sure at this point.
Yeah, that's a great question because, you have to start thinking about what systems of belief have existed and how have they become something else, right? Because a belief can start pretty small and then explode into something much bigger. The birds aren't really a great example of that. This is just something one-off thing that this guy thought it would be funny to do, and then it turned into there are entire documentaries on this. Not just showing, like, there are entire documentaries that were made, people trying to figure out if it was real or not, right? So some people did believe that this guy really believed that birds weren't real and this was an actual thing, and people did documentaries on this. So yeah, what happens when something big or even something small happens that, kind of escalates into something else? Yeah, and that's hard to predict. I think about this a lot too, 'cause one of the things I've studied in the past is Slender Man. So that was the online ghost story, some of you may remember, but there was the Slender Man stabbings in 2016, 2014, somewhere around there, that these two little girls stabbed their friend about Slender Man. And again, like that action-oriented response, there was no narrative saying to do that. They came up with the idea, and they thought that if they did that, that would please Slender Man, and he would take them in, basically take them to his house, and they would live there forever. Yeah, it's terrifying. And it started off as just this fun little thing on the internet. And people were making parodies of it, and they were making jokes about it. But then it became this really, really big, serious thing. And it, of course, caused a huge, big, dare I say, conspiracy of all parents being like, the internet is bad. And, is anyone thinking about the kids? All of that kind of stuff kind of spiraled out of it as well. And this idea that children don't understand the difference between reality and what happens on the internet, and which of course is just like, well, the things that happen on the internet are real. And these are also reality. But there was this idea that they didn't understand the difference. And so, yeah, these things can get really out of control. And one of the places it seems to happen a lot is when children are involved. Because that's like the one thing everybody can agree on is we should be, who's looking out for the children? Everyone can agree on that. So it becomes this larger sort of belief that things fall under it that you wouldn't necessarily put under there because of that, because you have that core belief of children are important and we should take care of them. So yeah, belief it's a fascinating area. It's one of my favorite areas of study in folklore. I really enjoy talking about it. But this goes back to David Hufford's "What I know, but what you know you only believe" idea too, right?
One final question, Andrea?
Yeah, one final question, yeah.
Is that?
Thank you. Could you speak to the role of memes as a medium for spreading conspiracy theories? Why are they effective?
Oh, for memes?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So memes, yes, they're very effective. And a good meme people don't realize, a good meme is hard to make. It takes talent, and sometimes one will happen just sort of spontaneously. It'll take off for whatever reason, but it is something you can't craft. It either sort of happens or it doesn't. So it is interesting how they take off, and what about them that hits us that we either identify with or we think is funny or something along those lines. And I don't know, why is it that little bit of text in those pictures, why does it get us? And I think in part because, like conspiracy theories, they're simple, right? If you want to deep dive into them further, you can. You can look this up if you want to, but you don't have to. You can just have this little bit of information that comes with a picture that can either be funny or it can be making fun of something or a lot of other things. So it is interesting how we've become really a meme culture in a lot of different ways, that we're using just these little tiny things to speak to larger issues. So I wish I knew what the magic was, because I would create some memes that would hopefully go viral and would actually, help with some of this. But yeah, it does become difficult in some ways. There was one question in the back that we didn't get answered. If we have time, if that's okay, yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and I really did appreciate kind of the topics of how to deal with people who see things differently than yourself and do it with compassion and also empathy. I'm a librarian here, and we do deal with questions about misinformation, and I always lead with information literacy, like following the publication path line, following the money, who benefits from the fact, quote unquote. But my favorite conspiracy theory right now is the death of the internet in 2016. And so For people who don't know, that the internet is dead, that there's no more organic content on the internet, and it's all socially constructed by the government as a form of mind control, one, but also as a or a late stage capitalism. So everything we do on the internet is, you know, to control us as as humanity. And so right now, how do I deal with misinformation? Teaching people digital literacy and information literacy, but also the actual commodities that we use are no longer trusted in order to create, you know, communities online or to help dispel myth or that are harmful. So
yeah, that's a really great question, and I don't know the answer to it. I'm sorry. I wish there was like an easy, quick answer I can give you, but that is, yeah, like what do you do when our main mode of finding information, even if it, you know, is good information or bad information, is already dismissed? I guess you take them to the books. That's like the sort of simple answer, but yeah, that does cause a massive problem when the institution is not trusted, when the means is not trusted. How do you find trust? And most of the time when I've worked with people on this, it's conversation. And it's not just one conversation, right? This is the hard part about conspiracy theory. It's not just one conversation that you have with, you know, your family member at Thanksgiving dinner. It's a lot of conversations. And I've talked a little bit in other lectures on kind of how to do this. And you know, one of the things I think is having those multiple conversations, if you have access to that person, multiple conversations over time. And if you know this person, if it is like somebody in your family, the ability to find allies that will also say things that will help them to reinforce that. So it's not just coming from you, it's coming from other people. So you can kind of find allies in there. But yeah, I think that's a really good question though, because it's becoming a massive problem. If people don't trust our main, you know, if you don't trust the government, you don't trust the Library of Congress, you don't trust any of these things, how do you trust the information? But they're still asking you. And I think that's your in, is you're still being asked as a human being. So if you respond as a human being and respond to an older tech that maybe they will accept, or even like, hey, this webpage was printed before 2016, you know, here we go, you know, we can use this one because this one's safe. So yeah, you kind of have to lean into the belief and know a little bit about it. Yeah.
Well, we probably won't resolve it, but this is a great discussion. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Andrea.